Current school discipline systems are having adverse effects which are creating a school-to-prison pipeline system. Current practices include the presence of authority in schools, zero-tolerance policies, fulfilling quotas, and privatization of prisons. Audible and the Loop Lab have collaborated on a series exploring different aspects of education in the city of Cambridge. We speak with Citizens for Juvenile Justice and Citizens of the World nonprofit organizations to understand the impact of the school-to-prison pipeline in our local community.
I began noticing the pipeline at the very beginning of my career as a lawyer.
The school-to-prison pipeline is two pipelines. The school-based arrest to prison pipeline and the school discipline to prison pipeline. These are two sort of concurrent pathways that together comprise a series of policies, both on the district and municipal level, push students out of the school system and make them more at risk for entering the criminal justice system.
When you're a juvenile court attorney and you're working in cities, you see your share of very serious cases. You know, kids who are gang involved, kids who are involved in shootings. Those were the kinds of cases I expected to see as an attorney. You know, going back to the start of my career, when the minimum age was 7, I did not expect to see an 8-year-old with an action figure sitting next to me.
In 1999, I finished grad school, came back to the Boston area from being in DC for a while, and the kids from my neighborhood and the kids from another neighborhood were really fighting, shooting, stabbing. There was an incident where, one of the guys was back around, trying to figure out who was shooting at him. And all this was happening in a park. And I knew both sides. I was really trying to keep the peace, try to make it so nothing happened. And I wasn't able to do that. Someone got killed, literally died that day. For me, it was like we gotta do this work. These kids, like I said, I knew both kids who were shooting at each other. And yeah, they were both good kids. They're both so one kid lost his life, his whole family, destroyed. 2 kids go to prison for life. Their families are destroyed. All because we don't have tight communities, so if we could build community, so I get emotional because it's real.
What bothered me the most was just how quick people were to want to give up on young people. You have a kid who's 14, 15 years old, there's no getting through to that kid. There's no helping that kid. There's no talking to that kid. And yet I'm representing these young people and I'm sitting down and I'm listening. And I'm hearing what they have to say. And when I'm going to court, I'm taking what they've told me and I'm meshing it with my arguments, and I'm seeing these young people open up. I'm seeing that these are young people with hopes. These are young people with dreams. We began to see a shift in making schools much more punitive, both through discipline policies and through, school policing policies after the Columbine shooting. That ushered in a nationwide, more zero tolerance policies.
According to research from 2016, I'm citing an article called School the Streets, Crime and America's Dropout Crisis. Students who are arrested at school are 3 times more likely to drop out than their peers, and students who drop out of school are 8 times more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. Research has shown that with the presence of school resource officers, there's more likely to be arrests on campus. And this is because certain misbehaviors or misconducts, which had previously been in the domain of the school disciplinarian or school administrator to, seek accountability, is now being put in the scope of the school resource officers, who is essentially a law enforcement officer. And so one of the tools that is used is arrest.
Genuinely remembering what it was like to be a kid. I hear people talk about fights in schools. I can't believe kids are just fighting in schools these days. And I just look at them and say, I was born in the 70s and came of age in the 70s and 80s. We were all fighting in school. But like, people act as if they never had that history. Well, kids today are so much worse. No, kids are kids. Kids have always been kids. And so I think folks get to a point where it's like they just disassociate from their own experiences, and then they become judgmental instead of taking a step back and saying, wow, when I was a kid, I remember what it felt like. I remember that the feeling of not fitting in, the feeling of being overwhelmed. And then also saying, okay, when I was a kid, we dealt with these things. Kids today are coming up, look at all the other things that they are dealing with.
Why is it that behaviors that, for so long did not require a student to be at risk of entering the criminal justice system, now if there's a student resource officer present, now this same misbehavior or same misconduct has these really severe consequences, whether it be school-based arrest or school-based discipline. These policies, which are overly punitive and exclusionary, end up pushing kids out of schools, out of their educational settings, and into the criminal justice system.
Time and time and time again, I saw kids where the primary issue was that they needed help. They needed support. They needed services. But instead of giving these kids supports and services, people were making the conscious decision to punish them. Now think of how mismatched that is for young people, because young people are in the process of learning not just in school, but learning appropriate behavior. But instead of meeting a young person where they are, instead of having teachable moments, suddenly you had this sweep in of policies and practices that said, we don't care, we're just gonna punish you. What we've seen as the school to prison pipeline has, as it evolved, is these tough approaches didn't teach kids a lesson and lead to less punishments or behavior. They led to young people being more likely to act out again. It led to young people missing so much time out of the classroom just due to suspensions and simply not being in school, that they became much more likely to drop out. And young people in the end, not only dropping out and not getting that key aspect of any young person's future, which is completing their education, significantly increased likelihoods of getting involved in the juvenile and criminal justice system. People who drop out of school are more than 3.5 times as likely to go to prison in their lifetime. This whole, you gotta be tough to teach a kid a lesson approach did exactly the opposite. It didn't lead to schools being safer. It didn't lead to young people doing better. The school to prison pipeline drives young people away from a pathway to success.
What that really does is it tells this young person that, they're not wanted here, that they are seen as a bad kid, which, at Citizens for Juvenile Justice, we firmly believe that there are no bad kids. There are only systems that fail to support kids.
This is the pipeline. These kids don't have to be here. If they had the right amount of counselors, if they had the right amount of supports, if they had people helping them when they got frustrated with their schoolwork, then they're not acting out. But we're choosing to punish children. And what really struck me, I saw all types of kids who were pushed into the court system and didn't need to be there. But for kids with disabilities, kids that literally had a legally binding education plan which said they need extra supports, having them not receive the support they get and then end up being pushed into schools, it was just wrong. And I can honestly say one reason I'm so passionate about school to prison pipeline work, it is the most deeply offensive thing that we do in our entire justice system. Because you're taking a kid who is clearly crying out for help, knowing the importance of educational attainment to any person's life outcomes, knowing the importance of educational attainment to overall public safety, because young people who finish their education and are able to go on and get jobs and migrate to careers are less likely to get in trouble. Knowing all that, you have people who are still willing to exclude and even arrest young people for the most minor of offenses rather than just give them help. There are many cases when you're practicing as a defense attorney where you say, okay, there's definitely two sides of this. Someone's been harmed, but this person still needs help. you're able to balance it. I would see cases in the school to prison pipeline setting that I just found inexcusable.
So the school to prison pipeline has to exist right now in order for some of these private prisons to remain in business. And unfortunately in America, prisons have been privatized. So there are companies that are making money off of either the housing of the inmates or all of the products that are being used in prison. So when I worked in the youth lockup in Virginia, all of the shoes that the kids were wearing were made by Bob Barker. We also right now, I was just reading an article where one of the private prisons are suing a state because the state guaranteed that their prison would remain so full at about 70, 80% capacity, but now it's not. So if we have agreements like this, then these prisons have to stay full. So then people have a reason and an objective to implement practices where it's like, oh, you have to go to prison, mandatory sentences and things like that. There's no way you should guarantee someone that a prison will remain at 80% capacity. You're just predicting crime. And if it's not happening, then you're forced to make it happen.
You can have a model where police officers are not in schools, but they are available to respond to emergencies. It's also important that any school district that's working with the police have a firm and clear memorandum of understanding, which says these are the type of offenses, or here's like a guiding principle for when police officers should be coming into schools and when they shouldn't. And the reason for that is in Massachusetts, our laws make a clear distinction between certain types and certain levels of behavior that are supposed to be handled by a school administrator in the disciplinary sense, as opposed to behaviors that require a law enforcement response. When police officers are present in school, those lines get blurred. Even focus groups with SROs bear this out, that what's considered worthy in law enforcement response in one school or in one district could be very different than in another. Typically with schools that have a higher proportion of students of color, behavior is more often perceived as being worthy of a law enforcement response. So by having a memorandum of understanding that's very clear that for these low-level behaviors, we're not calling the police, they're disciplinary, then you're still able to have police able to respond for very serious behaviors that require it, but you don't have that blurring of the lines that leads to young people being criminalized for behaviors that kids previously weren't and the kids today shouldn't be. Ultimately, our collective goal should be, how do we take young people, including young people who are having a hard time, and how do we get them to a point where they're able to thrive and be successful? We can't simply focus on the kids who do well. The kids who are struggling are just as important, and they deserve just as much of our love and our help and our support. Dismantling the school to prison pipeline means pulling our kids that are struggling in and giving them support and not casting them out and pushing them away. So beyond the talk of suspensions and arrest, it's about making our schools more responsive to addressing the trauma of young people. It's about making our schools much more welcoming. And it's about making our schools a place that a young person who isn't doing well can still learn from their mistakes and grow and get to a point where they're still able to be successful.
So if we normalize these clear channels of communication and ritualize them into how we structure our school day even, that could be an opportunity for students and teachers and everyone who's a part of the school community to voice different concerns that they have, different needs that they have that maybe aren't being met, different ways that their community can come together to support them. And hopefully that can sort of get ahead of any conflict or concerns that are brewing before they reach a point of something that would require the police to be called in. And so if someone is feeling unsafe, this could be an opportunity to voice that to their peers, to people who are in authority or have some decision-making privilege within the school system.
You know, we don't want to, again, we're not blaming the schools, we're not blaming the police, but we are blaming like these institutions. And restorative practices are often broken up are 3 different tiers. The line doesn't stop. I feel like they flow in between tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 would be preventative community building practices where we're getting to know each other, getting to know the community. Tier 2 is like, how do we problem solve? How do we talk about issues together? So say tardiness, folks are showing up 5 to 10 minutes late every day, you know? Let's problem solve together. I can't tell you how to get here 5 minutes early. I can't, tell you, but maybe listening to you, you're explaining that the trains are running really slow right now. So, okay, maybe we'll back down. Or maybe I can say, all right, well, can you leave a little earlier? Like we're problem solving together. Tier 3, I think, also doesn't have to be specifically between individuals, but there is no clearly defined right or wrong. Everyone in this case is right. Everyone has been wrong. Everyone has their own truth. So I think, again, that's a tier 3 kind of level thing. But if you look, either you're pro this or you're anti that, you can't be neutral, and folks who speak out to be neutral are often by one side or another, kind of called out for being radical.
The school to prison pipeline, it's very real. It is very real here in Massachusetts. And it's something that it's critical that we address, because when young people are pushed into this pipeline, it decreases the chances of grade retention, it increases the chance of dropout. And dropout is really that pathway towards negative life outcomes for our young people.
Students deserve better. Cambridge is a city known for cutting-edge education. Yet, in our very neighborhoods, these problems exist, which disproportionately affect minority communities. There are solutions such as creating clear channels of communication, moving away from punitive interventions, and encouraging community support systems. Efforts need to be made to ensure every child has access to a fair and supportive educational experience.